Hello, fiber friends. Charisse Nicole of Sew Hooked on Treasures. I'm here to help busy modern quilters maximize their sewing time by providing quick patterns and time-saving tips and tutorials in order for you to walk out of your sewing space feeling accomplished. Now, you may have stumbled across this tutorial and you're like, what exactly is quilt facing? Well, it's just an alternative method to finishing off the edge of your quilt. Binding gives you an added extra, we'll say, frame or border piece element to your quilt, and for some quilts, like, it works great, actually enhances the quilt, and it's perfect. For some quilts, you don't want that added extra, even if it is narrow, you don't want that added extra border, so you can use facing as an alternative. What happens that it doesn't show the finishing, the facing strips are on the back of the quilt and don't show. Therefore, you just get the quilt top as it is with no extra enhancements or detail around the outside of it. It is used a lot for art quilts, for example, and that works for them. They don't want that extra border or frame sometimes that comes with binding. But it's not limited to art quilts. You could use it for any sort of wall hanging, bed quilt, doesn't matter. If you don't want the extra trim that you get from binding, facing is the option for you. So here's an example if you've never seen facing. On this quilt, you see my borders, but you don't see the thin line across the top, right? That's because in this case, I use facing. Now you can see where it's different because I actually happen to use the facing strips that match the same fabric as my backing fabric. But it keeps the border of my quilt, just the two borders that I wanted, and didn't add any extra detail. That was the goal. And this quilt is about a queen size quilt. She's pretty large. So, like I said, you can use it on anything. If you'd like to learn, stick around. I'm going to walk you through everything step by step. So what you need your quilted quilt. This is just my example simple sandwich that I prepared for our tutorial. You will also need to have your strips completed. So you would sew them together, meaning your strips, just like you would binding strips. In this case, they're going to be facing strips. Now we're going to actually walk through how to create those strips and sew them together. This is assuming you already know how to do that. However, I will link to another tutorial in the description below that goes over how to do binding strips. Now, once you have your squared up quilted quilt, you will first start with two binding strips, the length of two opposite sides, two parallel sides. So I have chosen, just for example, my short ends to be my first end. So with the raw edge of the fabric facing out, I would measure the width of my quilt and cut strips the length of those two sides. Line them up, raw edges face out on both ends, and then I'm going to sew them the 1/4 inch along the edge like I would binding. But instead of going all the way around, we're just going to do these two sides first. Let's start with that. So now I've sewn each of these strips the 1/4 inch along both sides. I did not back stitch on either end, just simply sewed straight through. Now, your other two parallel sides, you're going to measure from just inside the 1/4 inch mark to just inside the opposite 1/4 inch mark. The idea is that you don't want your strip to go past that seam line that you just created. So I pre-measured my strips, and then I'm going to add them on like so. If you look closely, you can see how it's just inside here and just inside here. I will do the same thing for the opposite side. I'm going to put those down. It's just inside here and just inside here. Excellent. And then I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on this side and 1/4 inch on this side. In this case, on this one, I actually do backstitch a couple of stitches on both ends to secure that, because you don't have the advantage of it, you know, going all the way to the edge like you do with here and securing it. So in this case, I do. Is it required? Possibly not. It was an added, like, I guess, a little security for me in doing so. So now I'm going to sew those on. Now that I've sewn this line, this seam line, and this seam line in my 1/4 inch, I am going to trim the corners to reduce our corner bulk. You can use scissors, your rotary cutter, either way. Do not cut any stitches, but just trim off those corners to reduce that bulk that it would create if you didn't, once you flip your facing strips to the right side of your quilt. There we go. Now take your quilt over to your iron and we're going to press everything open. So you're going to take your quilt, start to flip. So I just use my thumbs in the corners, really what I did, my index fingers, and then flip. And you're going to press all of this out. When you press it, you are going to make sure, one, that you're pushing your corners out, whether you use a stiletto or a crochet hook is what I use. Doesn't matter, push your corners out to get them nice and sharp as possible. And when you press your facing strips down, I will turn this over so you can see after I turn the other side. Thumbs in the corners and flip. There we go. So then I will work on each of the 4 corners and making sure that they're nice and sharp as possible. But your facing on the back is going to look squared, not mitered like you're used to with binding, but will just look squared. It'll be boxy. And you want to make sure that you press the facing strip down so it's all the way behind your quilt. So you don't want it to kind of peek towards the front. Now this is the front of your quilt. You don't want it to kind of peek through. The idea is you're trying to hide it, so you're going to press it down so you can just slightly see the front of your quilt from the back. Glue basting is so extremely helpful when it comes to binding or facing, either one. I especially like it for facing though, because there is a lot less finagling and a lot less play, and it just makes it so much easier to hand stitch your facing down. However, do you have to? No, and you don't have to use this Roxanne's glue basting. It's just, I love the tip on it. It has a nice fine tip to be able to use it and not get glue everywhere, but simple school Elmer's glue, that works too. Now I've glue basted it down, and you can see how they just lay so much flatter, making it easier. You can get the same effect with clips and having the clips hold it in place. It just happened to be a really big fan of the glue basting. So there you have it. You can either hand stitch this all the way around to secure your facing, so that way you don't add an extra seam or line of stitching around the edge of your quilt. Or you can, if you like the element that it creates, you can machine stitch this down as well. So 2 options on how to finish that. Either way, now you have this nicely faced quilt and you can enjoy. I hope you have found this tutorial helpful for creating facing on your next quilt project. If so, please tap the like below and also subscribe. That way you're notified as soon as I upload any new contents or videos. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you around.